You're listening to the Road to Wisdom podcast, weaving stories told by wonderful minds about all things motherhood, health, intimacy, politics, nature, and everything in between.
Join us on an adventure discovering unique experiences that we can learn from to enhance the ways in which we live.
We are your hosts, Chloe
and Keshia.
Chanterelle Foggin, you are in the studio with us today, and we're so excited to have this chat. I just want to paint a little picture for everybody listening. Chanterelle Foggin, sorry, tongue twister because I'm reading Foggin and forager in the same thing and it's got me. Chanterelle Foggin, a forager, a wild food educator, a mushroom hunter, edible weeds advocate, cook and food writer. All the amazing things. A little backstory, Keshia and I were actually up on my property and we just ran into you up there foraging with my neighbour.
Yeah, definitely.
We were like, who are you? What are you doing up here? And we realised that you were looking for a really special or trying to identify a Mac Daddy, was it?
Oh yeah, that's the sort of common name that we've termed on that mushroom, but it was a macrocybe crassa. That was a big mushroom, wasn't it? Huge clump of mushrooms.
We will share a photo because we had the camera out and I did get some photos of us using it as a hat and it's as big as our heads.
Yeah, it's massive.
It's amazing, like this foraging thing that we're talking about. It brings people together. It builds connections. It's exactly what it's done with us, guys. It's connected us as neighbours and as people who share something in common. And I just find that part of it amazing, and also that mushrooms do that. I've so many connections that have been made through mushrooms, and it's sort of almost like a metaphor of how the mycelium, connects the trees and the intelligence of the underground as well.
And have you ever done psilocybin with a mate? No. Very connected. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh no, we were talking earlier before we started recording about breeding sweetgrass, but there was another book that had come to mind and I didn't get to mention it. It's is it the Secret Life of Trees or the Hidden Life of Trees?
Yes, yeah.
And they talk about the mycelium network and that's how trees communicate, literally through mycelia. And then anyway.
I mean, it's an amazing world, and that it's like the kingdom of fungi has only been actually termed in its own right as a kingdom in the 70s. So the space is just like a whole learning place, and we're still coming to huge understandings. But we're so lucky that there's been a light on, fungi, and through the media and through all these amazing documentaries that we can just switch on Netflix and watch or whatever. So it's really in people's minds. And it's seeming to trend a little bit, which is awesome, for bringing that light onto this space where there's so much more work to be done for us to understand really what these organisms are actually doing.
Yeah. How did you get to where you are? I mean, being a wild forager seems like a dream of a way to spend life.
I feel like it's my life's work, but people ask me this quite often, and really I feel like we're all been foragers since we were children. You and I collected flowers and made little potions, and we probably knew where in the neighbourhood the best fruit trees were, and where to go with our friends to collect things and whatnot. So for me, that's what my life was like growing up as well, in New Zealand. And I had hunting and fishing in my family as well. And my mum collected mushrooms and took me in the autumn to do that. So I grew up with foraging, but about in 2018, I had sort of a resurge and reconnection into this interest and this way of life, by getting into mushrooms, and I became very fascinated with the psilocybin containing mushrooms and what they can do and how people were using them in countries where they're legal. First of all, we probably should say when we're talking about any psilocybin mushrooms that they are illegal to pick out of the ground. So you can see them there, you can take photos of them in the ground, but once you've actually discharged it from the ground, you're handling Schedule 8 drugs.
Wow.
So we need to just be clear about that.
Yeah, because everything I hear is is definitely American based.
That's
where
right.
they're starting
Yeah.
to use it. Like MAPS are using psilocybin for post-traumatic stress and I think a whole range of things actually.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of work being done, and we do have studies happening in Australia, and people are aware that there has recently been a change in the scheduling of psilocybin. So it changed from Schedule 9 to Schedule 8. But we don't currently have any practitioner in Australia who's qualified to administer psilocybin, but we're on our way there. So that's promising, and that's a great step in the right direction. But a lot of people, there's been a lot of media attention on that change, and I think there has been a little bit of misunderstanding around how available that therapy is as yet. It's not really actually available to people in Australia as yet, but it's on its way. And in the countries where there has been, legislation to allow people to use these types of, active mushrooms, it's not just PTSD, it's treatment-resistant depression. There's a woman, Marg Ross, who at the University of Melbourne, who's doing a study on psilocybin and end of life, and they're having people have these, death transcendent experiences and able to accept the end of their life process a lot, easier for themselves, coming to a place of peace. I mean, so it's the reach is far and wide. But yeah, it's really, so I started getting interested in that. And so I found myself just absolutely fascinated by all fungi and mushrooms, and just sort of spread like the mycelium does into all the cracks of my life. And then I realized that I really wanted to learn more about mushrooms. In order to do that, I needed to know more about trees. So I started learning about Australian trees, and that led into bush tucker and edible weeds and just plants in general, because, mushroom season in Australia is not very long. We're in the midst of it right now, which is very, very cool. But when there wasn't mushrooms to forage, I still wanted to forage. So I learned about different things I could forage in the off season, and also about which trees and mushrooms had relationships, so I could target those spaces to forage more edible mushrooms.
That's so cool. So we're in the Northern Rivers. What kind of stuff is available?
We are literally in a beautiful big food bowl in the Northern Rivers. It's a beautiful, the biodiversity here is amazing. So from, nuts like bunya nut, macadamia nut, to things like, native ginger, lily pillies, there's a lot of bush fruits that are available, wild raspberries. As I said, we're in our mushroom season right now. So there's a lot of cool edible mushrooms that are about. The best way to learn about those is probably by getting involved with a tour or a group, and there's quite a few people who run those in the Northern Rivers. I can mention some of those, or we can attach them to the end of the podcast or whatever like that. But there's also things to forage at the beach, like seaweeds. In New South Wales, we're really lucky, and it's legal to forage any seaweed that's detached from the rock. So if you go to the beach after a storm and there's kelp washed up there, you can dry that and powder it, and then use that as a salt substitute for your eggs, so you're saving money on good salts, and that's got iodine in it and a whole range of really awesome,
If you've got it in the basket.
Yeah.
For those who are just listening to this, we actually have a massive foraging basket Chanterelle's brought in, and she has a whole bunch of goodies. So if you want to tune into the video of it, Chanterelle, if you can bring it out, and you can see on this camera here.
Sure. So I powder the kelp and use it as a salt substitute as well. Things like your lemon myrtle leaves, awesome for tea. So there's money to be saved if you're doing wild ferments at home, like fermenting some lily pillies into a wild soda. You're not buying kombucha anymore. You know what I mean? You start sort of saving money there. Other things in here, persimmons at the moment are in season and love to grow along creeks. They're pretty beautiful. I have got a couple of apples that I did forage. I just got back from Tasmania, so those were actually foraged in Tasmania. And we've got some, one of the cool mushrooms that I've got here is a wine cap, or a Stropharia rugos annulata, that one there. And that's a mushroom that in fact people do grow and farm themselves, but it will be growing wild in wood chip piles. So it's always worth a swerve over the side of the road when you see a wood chip pile on the side of the road to check out what's there. And it's there is a certain amount of sort of fear or mycophobia in Australia around mushrooms. Unfortunately for most of us, when we were little, when that magic of finding fungi started, someone said, "Oh, don't touch that," or "Don't don't go near that. And so there's this fear that we've generationally been handed down, but there isn't actually any danger in touching any fungi. Only if you ingest it would you have any problems and become unwell if it was a fungi that contained any toxins. Letting children touch fungi and explore it is a wonderful way to encourage their engagement with nature as well. It's so fascinating how they just pop up and disappear and all of that. That's part of the magic of fungi. So, again, getting involved with foraging groups or walks. And there's quite a lot of groups online as well. We run our own group, Forage and Grow New South Wales, and it's an awesome community on Facebook where we've got mycologists and botanists from around Australia, and they're sort of, we're a safety network for each other, where you can get plants or mushrooms ID'd on the page, and we also have a lot of fun and play around and be a bit stupid.
That's so cool. How many poisonous mushrooms do we have? I mean, is it likely that if we were foraging and we're like, oh, this looks like something, and we eat it?
Can I preface this? Because I had an experience with Roo when he was just crawling, and we were at one of the cafes in Tally Valley, the Eco Village one, and it had just been raining, and these like white ball mushrooms had sprouted up all over the place, and I wasn't paying attention, and then I looked over at him, and he had one in his mouth, and he was chewing on it, and I freaked out. Yeah. I'm like, how do I know if it's poisonous or not? How do I know? Because I had no idea, and I'm calling a friend who's a pediatrician, and he was like, you know what? I'm sure it'll be fine. The worst that's going to happen is he's going to have a little trip for a while. I was like, oh my God.
I do advocate, making sure of what you've got on your hands. So one of our foraging sort of guidelines is, if in doubt, leave it out. So unless you're actually completely 100% sure about what you've got in front of you, don't eat it. Mm-hmm. And this, it becomes a process of just learning, because, you didn't know a tomato was a tomato until you were told 100 times by different people, this is food, this is a tomato. So it's the same sort of theory with the fungi. Person-to-person learning is amazing way to actually share the knowledge as well. But there are a lot of great books. We have fungi resources available to us in Australia, which is specific to our areas. We have the Queensland Mycology Society. They put out fungi flips, which are really great, easy to learn ID charts. There's also a couple of great books by Australian mycologists that start out with learning edible species and their poisonous lookalikes. So that's the first way to go. So one thing I really encourage people to get involved in as well, it's a real nerd out here, but if you do find the fungi stuff interesting and you want to get involved in it, you can become a citizen scientist through iNaturalist. Using the app iNaturalist is a great way to start logging your finds and adding, information to our Australian mycota, what we know about what mushrooms we have, because only 6% don't quote me, I think it's around 6% of our mushrooms in Australia have been named or scientifically described. So it's a huge space of learning. So when you're actually putting your photos onto iNaturalist, you're helping our scientists and mycologists to know what's out there and where it's growing. And then what you can do on the iNaturalist app is actually see what species are growing in your area. So then you can know what to target, and you can be like, okay, this is the one we're looking for. Then learn the poisonous lookalikes. Join into the Forage and Grow New South Wales group, or Australian New Zealand Fungi ID, or one of the big groups I know Facebook's a bit naff and nobody's into it anymore, but it does have these wonderful platforms for community engagement in the group styles, which a lot of the foraging people in Australia, engaged in that. That would be my suggestion for starting out for learning for ID. If in doubt, leave it out. Get that involved in something local, a walk or in a group that's local, and start with learning one edible species that you're looking for that will be growing in your area, and learn the poisonous lookalikes to rule out. In Australia we do have some poisonous mushrooms that we need to look out for, and some poisonous plants. So the poison hemlock grows, and it looks very similar to Queensland lace, which is a member of the carrot family. So that's a plant that most foragers need to know about as well, because that can be, even touching that can be dangerous. Also, we do have in New South Wales a couple of stinging plants in our bush too. So just, knowing a couple of those plants can be really helpful and handy. And it's great, bush education for kids as well.
You actually run a homeschool foraging group, don't you?
Yeah, so I've got a group of teens and tweens. And we're doing a year of foraging together. So it's a one abundant year foraging homeschool class, and we meet around every 6 weeks through the year, exploring different topics from urban foraging to fungi. And at the end they will have a student-led assessment that they'll present to me, and it will be something that they're interested in about foraging. So it's super cool to be involved in some kids start of their wild food journey.
That'd be so amazing,
because it'll be something that they'll keep for the rest of their lives,
And I feel like it's so necessary for all children to know this. Like I went to a private school, and why don't I know what is toxic in my environment and what we can actually eat? Like it seems like such basic knowledge that we should all have. And Chanterelle, let's get you into the schools.
I think there is, more and more people wanting to know. Like since COVID, there's been this real returning to kind of, okay, well, if I can't go to the supermarket and I can't get plants at Bunnings to plant, what do I do? What will we eat? And so people became more interested in it. And I know there are schools with, bush. They're planting out little bush tucker gardens in the playgrounds now, and having little bush schools and wildcrafting schools and things like that. That there are more and more of that stuff coming. So thank goodness, that's awesome,
do you think,
isn't it?
like in our environments, like let's just say the Northern Rivers, do you think there's enough food to, even if we had to propagate, like is there enough? Like if we all just reduced the intake of food?
Well, I think we did touch on this just before we started recording, and like I said, if we moved into, I think it was only like about 30,000 years ago that we stopped primarily being hunter-gatherer foragers, and we moved into bigger groups, and it was hard to feed people in bigger groups, and in numbers there was safety and community and all of that. So it's, you'd need to not be in a normal full-time job to be feeding yourself or, a couple of people in your family with foraging. And that's why we have the forage and grow idea as well, because, you need to supplement what you were foraging with some things that you would be growing to be able to provide yourself with a really balanced nutrition. But the thing is about these foods as well that are growing in the wild is they're superfoods, they're packed with vitamins and antioxidants and, liver cleansing qualities, and
adaptogenics.
I mean, if we even look at some of the medicinal mushrooms, and we have, some more scientific information around those now to know that there's, so much.
Do we have those more common medicinal mushrooms growing here, like the reishis and the...
So that's a little bit of a controversial one in the foraging world.
So get into it.
We have a species of reishi. So the genus of the mushroom that the reishi sits under is called Ganoderma. And we have our own native species of Ganoderma. We have several of them in Australia. We have some, in fact, that look very similar to the reishi. I think it's lucidum. That's the Chinese reishi. So we have some that look, visually very similar, but we don't know how they look under a microscope. We do not have the DNA sequencing or the scientific work to know if they are, in fact, containing similar or the same compounds and qualities. So there are a lot of people out there at the moment who do collect our Ganoderma species, our native Ganoderma species for medicine, and they make tinctures or powders or that's normally the two, the tincture or the powder. My thinking is, like, let's leave it in the wild. Let's leave it there until we do know. Because we need these mushrooms to also be there as well for these future mycologists and botanists and plants to be there, so that they can figure out what's going on. So if people are just taking from the wild, that's,
and I guess they
not
have
the
a
best
role.
outcome.
Like the mushroom is there to do something. What is it doing? And we just before we started recording, we were talking about braiding sweetgrass, which I always refer to, but she puts it in such a way that the trees, they're talking to each other. They discuss, what the bounty is going to look like. If one tree's sick, then they're all sick. If it's a good time, they'll all have a good, do you know what I mean? So I'd love to hear, what is the mushroom doing and how does leaving it there actually impact our ecology?
Yeah, well, I mean, mushrooms are and fungi are just vital to our survival. We'd be completely covered in leaf litter and organic matter if we didn't have these guys doing their work. I sometimes call them the little rotters, even the little mushrooms. They're rotting down things. They're breaking down so that other processes can happen. They're a huge part of the cycle of that, the life and death cycle of the world, which keeps us actually going. But different mushrooms have different jobs. Different fungi have different jobs in our ecology, and not all of it's fully understood yet. And there's been a lot of, I suppose, media attention on the sharing of information between trees and fungi, the mycelial network. And we do know that they do have a connection and that they're sharing sugars. And if one tree is, needing more nutrient, then often mycelium will help to send the sugars on to another tree or something like that. But we don't fully understand it. So I can't speak more on it than that, really, because I feel like, it's a very evolving space, and
I feel like it's also a indigenous knowledge as well, which is, I'd love to speak to Robin Walkammer about this. But
I always imagine it as like the mycelial network, and I think it's because I've listened to a fair bit of Paul Stamets, and I always imagine the mycelial network being as vast as like the stars in the universe, and it's just like all that interconnectedness. It's just under us instead of above us, which sounds real space cadet. Now that I'm saying it out loud.
I mean, people make all sorts of, people compare the mycelial network to the internet network, and how, there's so many kind of things like that. So yeah, you're definitely not space cadetting there.
Oh my gosh!
But I love that in Braiding Sweetgrass, how she talks about, how trees all fruit in different places but at the same time and all of that. And it's the same with mushrooms. Like, there must be some intelligence that, I mean, I'm not aware of what it is, but same mushroom is popping up in this place as it is in this place, you know what I mean? So they're sharing information.
Doesn't she put it like the wind carries the message to them or something? It's like,
I can't quite remember, but it's the way she explained as a scientist, the way that she poetically explains things is just, I think it's part of the magic and touching part of that book, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's so beautifully, and I haven't read this book, just hearing it from you guys, but it does so beautifully encapsulate what nature is. It's just interconnectedness, and even if you can't see one thing from the next, like they're so connected.
There is no separateness, is there? There's no separate science and art or whatever. They are the same thing. It's all
which together. We're a part of too.
Yeah.
Which is why I asked about if we had those medicinal mushrooms growing, because, we both really love adding medicinal mushrooms to our morning.
It's trendy, isn't it?
Yeah,
it
like all
trend.
the nootropics and, all of the things. Exactly. And so, I often wonder if I contradict myself, because, I really believe that what's needed for us is we're a part of that in our ecology, in our, 50K radius or whatever it may be.
I am a big believer in that
too.
So
I wonder, like, I understand these mushrooms are wildly harvested from China, but are they good for me? Like once it's traveled all the way over here and I'm in my environment with my light codes and my messages and whatever's coming out from the earth for me with my bare feet, is this necessary?
And I think that's why you do get people who are, you know, collecting and harvesting and making their own tinctures or powders because they're feeling the same way as you. They're wondering what is the product they're getting. But what you can do is you can buy, you can inoculate your own logs at home that you've maybe, you know, had to fell a tree in your yard or some maintenance or collect logs from someone's property that you know. And you can inoculate that log with the Chinese reishi spores and grow your own reishi, Chinese reishi at home.
Where do we get these spores from?
There's a few good mushroom suppliers around Australia online. Like Aussie Mushroom Supplies. There's Wollumban Gourmet Mushrooms. Gary is awesome. He's at the Murbar markets every week. He sells the shiitake and the reishi
I feel like
inoculants.
they go to my markets too where I shop.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But there's heaps of awesome mushroom suppliers,
Because
companies around Australia.
Definitely spoken about this. We're like, I wonder if we could, because, you know, we can propagate a plant.
Yeah.
How does propagating or growing our own mushrooms look like so we have that abundance?
Yeah. I mean, and that's a super fun part of the whole mycology thing that's just a whole nother way, another alley. I only have sort of small, like touched on that a little bit last year, the cultivation of gourmet mushrooms like oyster mushrooms, lion's mane. So you can grow all those ones at home and it's actually pretty easy. Again, there's really cool organisations that have online mushroom growing courses. Milkwood, I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're a permaculture group. They have really awesome information about foraging in Australia, about what's legal, what's not, about what might be available seasonally, that sort of thing. They also teach mushroom cultivation at home, really simple techniques. They have online courses for this stuff. So they're a really awesome resource.
Sounds like something we should.
Milkwood, yeah, they're really cool. They live down in Tasmania. They're amazing.
Wow. Something... Sorry, you want to go?
No, you go for it.
I was just going to say something else that we were talking about before we hit record was weaving and connecting with indigenous locals and sitting down and weaving together was a great way to learn about this stuff. And I just kind of thought quickly, is there a respect system for foraging? Like, are we to pick certain things and leave other things, or, you know, within the seasons framework?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I mean, we have foraging ethics that encourage and, you know, teach people when they come along to a workshop. This is sort of how we start out with, you know, acknowledgement of country and acknowledgement of the fact that a lot of these foods aren't just, you know, foods to people. There are sacred medicines, totems. They have energy. So, yeah, the first and foremost rule is only take what you need. And that comes, you know, from a place of respect for nature. And that is a First Nations type of view of looking at how to forage. But then on the flip side of that, straight away attached to that one, is this idea of not pick shaming anybody, because we don't know who you're providing for. So there could be somebody out collecting mushrooms and they could be taking several baskets or boxes, and they could be sharing that with several generations of their family who are maybe perhaps Polish, and that's actually their food tradition, and it's part of their generational sharing. So, and that's just an example, but there could be many examples of people collecting from the wild and taking what they need, and what they need looks different to what you might need. So, yeah, there's this idea of, you know, only taking what you need, leaving some for the birds and the bees, assessing an area, if a space, and getting to know your patch, your places, you know, looking out for signs, you know, if you are foraging roadside, which I do, looking out for signs of places being sprayed by council or whatnot. It's pretty easy to see when something has been sprayed. And looking out for the area as well, like, has it been through a flood recently? Is it recovering from a fire? Caring about that stuff. That's, again, part of that seasonal and part of the the turning of the times in nature and the respect that you give to it through that.
Can you go a bit deeper into that? Like if you were foraging in an area like the one we're in right now that was recovering from a flood or from a fire, why would we not want to be taking too much from that?
Yeah, well, particularly in relation to how the floods affected our mycelium in the northern rivers, a lot of it obviously was just washed away, and a lot was drowned. It got too wet and it wasn't, it needs a good balance of wet and dry. So we've lost quite a bit. It's going to take a little while for it to rebuild. So when you're in an area, if you see a mushroom and there's just one of, then possibly thinking, should I let that be there to spore so that for next season there's going to be 5 or 6 there, rather than take that one to take home and really it's possibly not going to actually be enough to feed you or yourself anyway. So thinking in terms of looking about, being aware what's around. If it's a rare mushroom, thinking about conservation and thinking about future generations having these mushrooms there and these items there. So again, if you go to a tree and there's only one fruit on it or only a few fruit, perhaps take notice of that, where that tree is, come back next year. Trees often have one really good year fruiting, 1 year off. Like, for example, our bunya, which is one of those, really sacred, ancient foods that deserves a deep reverence and respect. It has a good year every 3 or 4 years. So we just had a really amazing bunya bounty last year.
What do you do with bunyas?
What can't you do? Jeez.
I feel like Kim, who's our neighbour, said that she was like, she makes cakes out of bunya. I'm like, what?
I considered
brownie. No, she said brownie. You made a chocolate brownie.
Chocolate brownie. You can dry the nuts and make flour with them, and then use that as like a gluten-free substitute. It has this high piney kind of note to it, which is just beautiful. So think about a potato meets a pine nut, and they have a baby, and it's a bunya nut.
Cute.
So bunya nut gnocchi has become my sort of signature dish. We did that up at the Pottinger restaurant for the chef and the forager degustation we did last year. One course we did the bunya nut gnocchi.
Can we go there, by the way? It looks delicious.
So good. I had Mikey, the chef, actually come to my place this morning to pick up some bunya nuts, because they are, there's not much around this year. So, and it's that sharing. It's like, oh, mate, do you have some? Yeah, I do. Come over. I'll give you a couple.
Amazing.
So again, it's just how foraging keeps just building and building and building community.
Yeah, it's the notion of community and
and people ask, where can I go foraging as well? That's a question. So it's important to let people know that we don't take any matter at all from our national parks. That's super important. But also really cool to know that you can find out from your local council about your local nature reserve and what the actual laws are around that. Just ringing up the council is a good way to do that if you're worried about, whether it's legal to forage in your local parks and nature reserves. A lot of state forests are fine, like for example pine forests, and taking the kids out to the pine forest for a mushroom hunt is one of the most magical things to do. It's like,
do we have one around here? I know there's one in Victoria.
We've got pine forests, but they're a little bit further out. So, you're going out to probably Stanthorpe for a weekend, but in the wintertime, Stanthorpe, go to the truffle farm. You go get to the apple places, eat some cheese, drink some wine, go mushroom foraging.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah. Well, I normally do the mother-daughter annual pine forest hunt, which is...
When's that?
Unfortunately, my mum can't come with me this year, so I've been trying to recruit just anybody to come with me.
I'll come.
I also have daughters that will come.
Yeah, great. Okay.
We'll just do all the mums and daughters.
Yeah, exactly. And there is pine forest in Armadale as well, which is another beautiful autumn winter trip too. Like it's, the Highlands, Northern Highlands of New South Wales, and you get all the beautiful colours of the deciduous trees. You get rose hips and blackberries and all the different things to forage up there, which is so beautiful too. New South Wales is an amazing place to forage. Just like, we're so lucky.
Is it like seasonal, or do you feel like if you're really connecting into the seasons and you've got your eye out, there's always something.
Yeah. It definitely is. I'll just go back to where people can forage as well. I wanted to mention that private property is the best place to be able to forage, but not every person has access to land, and so it kind of gives this feeling of maybe privileged people only being able to access this. But again, going back to how it builds connection is when you go past somewhere and you see that lemon tree and it's overladen with fruit and they're falling on the ground, go knock on the door and say, hey, would you mind if I took a few lemons? You'll probably get a smile and someone say, oh, I can't wait to see what you do with them. And the return of some lemon cordial or lemon butter or whatever that is again, it's building more and more connection for people, and it's giving you this amazing sense of good feedback in your brain where not only are you like using stuff from the wild that might just go on to waste, but it's finding food is literally what we're made to do. We get this huge dopamine hit when we find something to cook with that is growing in the wild or being neglected, left somewhere. I think that's a really wonderful way to start out. And even walking down your suburban streets, a lot of people plant lily pillies as hedges. So you'll see the lily pilly fruit just falling to the ground, and they make amazing jams, amazing vinegars, amazing cordials. You can dry them out, put them into cakes, There's so many things that can be done. And again, just like most people don't even know that might be edible. They're growing something there on their front verge that is edible.
Yeah.
Also really, good to note that trees that are overhanging fences or, that sort of thing are fair game. It's actually legally a thing. You're allowed to pick
Oh my God.
So, one of my I'm a bit of an unrepentant forager sometimes. One of my elderflower tree spots is it's literally hanging over someone's front yard. They don't even know that it's elderflower or elderberries, and I just go there every once. I don't take everything, but I go there once in a while and use the flowers to make, elderflower champagne or cordials or something like that, I haven't returned one to them.
Where
I should. But, it's legal to be able to actually take something that's overhanging a fence. It's probably just going to fall and get left anyway.
We actually have a few blocks away, which we found during one of the lockdowns. We were gifted just before the lockdowns, I think it ended up being 20 silkworms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
I see your mulberry tree there.
Yeah.
I already spotted that.
We've got
straight out.
2 here, 2 on the other side and 1 out the front. We're a little mulberry obsessed
Yes.
here. But before these guys were big enough that we could pick the leaves, we had to forage for leaves for these silkworms that grow and eat at astronomical rates. And we went around foraging around here and found a tree that was over someone's fence, and it's the biggest tree, and not only were you getting these massive leaves, but
The berries.
Oh my God, the berries. And we'd come back just purple stained. The kids are just purple. I'm purple.
I think mulberry is actually when I have people come, to workshops and, you remind them that they used to forage mulberries as children when they were walking home from school or whatnot. And they're like, oh yeah. Mulberries. And the leaves are edible as well for people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you can steam them and use them as
Do you have to steam them?
I would, because they're not when you're getting in touch with wild foods as well, a lot of the time you're using your hands and it's visceral, you're feeling things. When you're touching the leaf, it tells you this leaf needs to be steamed.
It's got something on it.
It's fibrous.
Well, it's fibrous,
Yeah.
it's tougher, it's going to need a steam or whatever. One of the sort of advices around collecting, edible weeds for greens, for example, dock or dandelion leaves. They're two that can be quite, most people are similarly aware of what they are. You're looking for the most tender young leaves to use because they're going to be less bitter and more palatable in the mouth as well. But a lot of people do use the mulberry leaves like, you know, a betel leaf, you know, to wrap food in. So just steam the leaf and then, you know, whatever you've got, your little veggies sliced up and roll the leaf up and dip into a satay sauce or something like that as well.
Yum.
Yeah, so so many uses when you start to open your eyes up to just like foods all around us, you know. Just started looking outside.
Yeah,
going,
we've got some bananas behind you. So got some bananas there, some passion fruits.
No, I just thought that I was like, I think that's a bleeding heart tree, but I thought for a moment I thought, is that a coastal hibiscus? Because the cottonwood or the coastal hibiscus is a beautiful tree and the flowers are edible and they're just so yummy. And it's one that grows like really prolifically in the northern rivers and most people know it. Also the bark was traditionally used by local Bundjalung peoples for making string and using for fibre, which is a really cool thing as well. Getting back to the weaving stuff and all of that. Yeah.
Are you still doing that?
I have a couple of baskets that are unfinished.
I know the unfinished one.
If you want to just look over there, there's a whole thing of projects that are unfinished, crafting projects.
No, I'm very familiar with that. Yeah.
Could you tell us about the weaving that you told us before we...
Yeah, well, I was just saying that like I have tried to engage with my local Indigenous community in a way where I haven't come in just asking for their knowledge and their wisdoms and their sacred, you know, stuff. And to go in and build connection and community again. I've been really lucky to just sit with some women weaving, and that's been an awesome way. And when women weave together, you know, there's that circling of talking, of moving around subjects and of, you know, sharing into the spiral. And yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to be a part of. And I found it to be a way that I've been able to build connection with people that are Indigenous locally and then find out more from them about their plants and foods and medicines as well.
That's so interesting because we were yesterday in a conversation we were having, it was about, you know, like we have these traditions and ceremonies and stuff that come from America and China and India and places like that. And we were like, what's the equivalent for healing modalities in Australia? But that kind of just paints a picture of what would be our version of women's gatherings and women's circles is sitting and weaving with an elder and, you know, pining to learn that knowledge.
And I feel like that you can just, the meaning of weaving with your
weaving wisdom, which is funny because we were going to name our podcast Weaving Wisdom. Someone already stole it.
And they didn't do much with it, by the way.
That happens. Oh, well, yeah. But no, like, yeah, I think it is like, it's just an intrinsic thing, and just to sit and watch is part of, you know, understanding someone else's culture. I think we tend to be very focused on goals and getting what we need out of things, but there is this idea of just letting things unfold or unravel, and letting time be. That we don't have the same sort of ideas around time and space. And, you know, I was super lucky to recently have Uncle Frank, and he's a Bundjalung man from Finglehead, come for our homeschool class and do a smoking ceremony to welcome the children and talk on his connection to the plants and foods and medicines. And, you know, he was saying, you know, it's not just like a lot of people just like, what can I get out of this? What can I take from this plant? But again, it's just a reciprocal nature of a relationship that there is an encouraging towards understanding. And it's difficult for us because we kind of don't have the framework to do that. But yeah, sitting and spending time with people and that adds to understanding and gaining of sharing of information.
That's really a really beautiful point, actually. And yeah, to bring it back down to, I mean, everyone's talking about slow life and slow living, but it's not really, because you still have appointments and engagements and commitments and everything's so time-based. But when it comes to getting that inherent ancient wisdom, it's not about taking. It's like you want to be, you know, weeks, months, years around a campfire with the people who know it and have actual conversations, and through the conversations absorb that knowledge, and it will last, and you get that deeper understanding that's not just what can I take, what is poisonous, what is not poisonous.
I think it's a very white man way.
Yeah.
And there's nothing slow about going backwards and embodying that knowledge either. Like there's no sitting around doing nothing. It's like
no, but it is. But I think the learning process can be the learning process around foraging. Is this the idea of why I wanted the homeschool to be split over the year, not just one class, is because it is a slower learning. Because, I mean, you think about the time where you were learning about what foods you could put into your mouth between 0 and 5. That took 5 years.
Yeah.
So we're going, we're taking it back to that level. So it can take some time, but it's a thing that will stay with you for the rest of your life as well. You'll never look at the world the same once you're like, that's food. I could use that. Wow, what if I got that and put those two things together? How would they taste?
It's a really beautiful thing to actually have, because, a lot of people at the moment are worried about all sorts of different things. And one of them is just feeling really insecure in a big, scary world and not feeling like you could actually take care of yourself. And I feel like once you do gain that little bit of knowledge, be like, I'm actually all right. Like I could actually feed myself for a while. Like I could.
I think it just comes back to, people feeling this root disconnection.
Yeah.
So this foraging journey, this wild food journey, it gives you an opportunity to really be in your authenticity as a human being.
Yeah,
it's
like what else
oh
are we meant
wow,
to do?
yeah, exactly. And like I was saying before, when you're finding a food in the wild, you're creating this amazing feedback loop in your brain of dopamine hit, and you're feeling so good and so like high from, like I remember, the first time I had been looking for chanterelle mushrooms for like years, for like 2.5 years. I've been looking for this mushroom. She'd been eluding me everywhere. And the first time I found it, I was literally like high. I was like screaming.
Are you sure it was a
No, it was definitely a Chanterelle.
Yeah.
And, it was like I was just so excited. I was dancing and, it was just out of control, awesome feeling like.
That's got to be part of the medicine of eating locally as well. Like
100%.
like the
Going to
journey
the farmers
where you
markets
go.
is similar.
But even like, if you're out in the wild, like the walk to get to the foraging part, like,
that's
all
that's
of that
all part
is
of
the medicine.
it. Yeah, exactly. Spending more time in nature, knowing what's around you. Yeah, like it's great for your physical health, just being more active every day. Mental health, everything. It's been a real healing thing for me in my life. I've had my struggles with my own mental health stuff, and at times in my therapy I was actually recommended to start to try and build up this catalogue or this kind of list of all these things that I love doing, and that was a part of doing the foraging in 2018 when I started getting into the foraging stuff again. Was, I was using it as actual therapy, complementary to my CBT therapy, cognitive behavioural therapy, with my therapist. So it literally is healing for people.
Something I actually do want to just touch on, and I'm not sure if this is in your scope of knowledge, but because psilocybin is and microdosing, and that's such a big thing at the moment.
Especially in this area.
Yeah, and
it is.
I've spent a lot of time in Canada, and it's obviously, like almost every second person is microdosing on a daily. And as a person who's studied, health quite extensively, I often wonder, I don't think that we should be doing it on a daily, but obviously people are really obsessed, like they really just want that feeling. It's an escape route, right, for their reality.
I mean, there's kind of the two ideas running there, I suppose. And like, there's no denying, like, although these substances are illegal in Australia, there's no denying that we have an underground community, and we have this underground culture of our own in Australia around psilocybin containing mushrooms. And there are people using them for microdosing or macrodosing even, and whatnot. So there is also important to note, I think, for people who, are learning about that, and you can do your own research. It's very easy to find out about the microdosing sort of schedules, but as humans, we actually will build up a tolerance to psilocybin very quickly. So you can't do it every day. Even the microdosing, the way it's set out is normally 1 day off, 2 days, 1 day on, 2 days off sort of scenario. But there's different protocols depending on whom you research.
What you're trying to achieve.
Stamets has his own type of microdosing protocol that includes the B vitamins as well, and the lion's mane as well. So people will do their own research on that, but you can't take psilocybin every day and expect it to get you high. If people are taking it to escape, that's the other thing that I think is important for people to understand, is that these substances are going to exacerbate what you're going through as well. It's not always this rainbow sunshine experience. Scene and setting has a lot to do with how your experience is going to play out as well. That's what the research suggests. And so, being in the right place in the state of mind as well to have these type of journeys that are, being breakthrough experiences for people or whatnot, or, there is a lot of important emphasis on the intention and what intention you have as well. So there is this whole, you guys probably know, and a lot of people in Northern Rivers, have done the hot skip and a jump. There's this whole, tourist industry around entheogens like ayahuasca and mushrooms. So you can go to other countries now and book these tours where you're going into an ayahuasca ceremony or into a mushroom ceremony. So there's a lot of ethical questions around this whole industry as well. And as it develops in Australia, there is groups already looking at making sure that we have the right ethical things in place so that there isn't abuses of power or things like that, which have been happening, to people when they're going to these ayahuasca retreats or mushroom retreats and stuff like that. So hopefully our community will take longer to introduce this to being a legal thing, but we'll have the right type of ethics and code of practice around these things. But it's not to say, and anyone who's at least any aware knows that we have underground, ayahuasca ceremonies in and around the Northern Rivers and mushrooms ceremonies happening in and around the Northern Rivers at the moment as well.
Toad and peyote and there's a lot.
Yeah.
That heard them all.
I think we've got our own small tourist industry for people coming within Australia to do things like that in this area as well. So and there are people who we have lots of groups out there at the moment. Australian Psychedelic Society, Entheogenesis Australis. These are people who are not only, looking at helping to change legislation, but they're building this code of practice and looking at harm minimization for the fact that there's no denying that there's people out there doing it, even though it's illegal. But we can minimize harm for people, and we can try and encourage a certain level of practice and standards in our own community.
Absolutely. I'd love to go back to one point you brought up earlier about when council's spraying.
Yeah.
Because I know that usually what they're spraying is water soluble. It's more or less glyphosate, is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we're foraging and, we don't want to be consuming glyphosate or giving that to our children while they're developing.
Yeah.
How would we go about avoiding that? Like, what's the...
Well, you can ring up your council and ask them about what they use when they spray roadsides as well to get a really clear idea. First thing I always say to people is, like, I know there are a lot of people probably like you guys and myself who try to, go out of their way to eat organic, but those people are going to the supermarket and buying sprayed, vegetables and
Grains.
and stuff
You're
that
eating
have
it
been.
anyway.
Yeah, they're eating pesticides and herbicides, and they don't even think. But then as soon as something's side off the road, got this huge distrust about that. But yeah, again, there are places where they don't spray. Like for example, I live in a small village in the very northern rivers, right up by the border, and parts of Cobbicide they don't spray. They'll come along with a big grader kind of machine and just cut back all of the stuff. So it's about knowing your spots, looking. It's pretty obvious when you can see that line of dead grass,
Yeah.
But also the thing too, I find like there are like these marginalized areas. The more you start opening your eyes to these like small sides of the roads areas, you'll start to notice bigger areas that are these like forgotten about areas, and there's no spraying happening in those more larger sort of sides of the road areas where it's down like little sides of the roads and things like that. So just getting to know your area and exploring and just being more aware and opening your eyes is really important. But again, I think people freak out a lot when they don't even think about it in their own like lives. Yeah.
Like that's actually what you're consuming all the time if you go to your general supermarket.
Like, I can say even myself, there's times where I'm, time poor and you end up at the supermarket, you're eating those foods as well. So I'm not saying I'm totally better than that. No, not at all. But I think the most important thing too is just having even a look in your own backyard. For example, you can control what's happening in there. I guarantee you there's edible weeds in your own backyard. There's like,
we're going to take you out
there we can
after
go out
this.
there, and have a look. And, the more and more you start to use them, the more that they seem easier to use and to do. And it does take that little bit more time to like go out and say to everyone, hey, let's shut off the TV and do half an hour of foraging greens in the backyard, everyone, give them their own little, bowl or basket, some little safe scissors to snip things with, and getting them involved in their food. Kids love it.
Yeah.
And there's such amazing pattern recognizers, children. Like it's like their brains are made for it. They love recognizing patterns. It's a game of, hide and seek. And we all need games in our lives as well, even as adults. So it brings that playfulness back to us and playing with our food, which, I don't know
One of
why
my
we
favourite things to teach my kids was when we were spending time in Toronto, as all the ice would melt away and it would get a little bit warmer, the dandelion would pop up, and teach them the significance of why that was so important for spring and how it's happening to our bodies. Like we needed that for bile production and all these things. And they were like, like it was just, they're just such light up moments and you just don't forget them.
Exactly. Like kids love it. I've got one of my best friends that I've got into foraging. Like nobody can be around me without having to do this now. But her children actually have made this foraging board game where, you've got to go around the board and collect these edible weeds. And once you get a collection of the right things to make something, you level up. Like these kids are amazing.
Wow.
They just like blows my mind what they can do.
Well, my 1-year-old, because my kids go to a Steiner school here, and from the car park walking the kids into school, we always pass a lily pilly tree. Yeah. And every time we pass it, my 1-year-old is like, more, and points and wants me to grab her a lily pilly. It's very bare at the moment. So
but they do love it though, don't they?
They love it. And we'll be out walking around here and she'll start pointing to a lily pilly tree going more that I've never seen before. Yeah. And I look around.
It's the pattern recognizing. They're amazing at it. They're really, really good. Kids are amazing at it. Yeah.
My kids are awesome at finding mushrooms up and everything. They're like, is this a good one? I'm like, oh God, what have we done here? Anyway.
But like I'd just be like, all mushrooms are good ones.
All mushrooms are good.
Like they're all got something to do in their place in the nature. So they're all good. That's what I think. Yeah.
So much to learn.
Absolutely. Well, it's so good to have had you in here today, Chanterelle.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to say that after you introduced me. Thank you so much for having me here and to talk about this. And yeah, it's so lovely to know you both from mushrooms.
From foraging.
Yeah.
No, it's been brilliant. I feel like
I've gotten so much out of this.
Yes, yeah. And Now I just want
We
to keep
just have
going.
to meet up for another forage at your place sometime soon.
I mean, there's probably a bounty up there that I'm so unaware of, and I've been really observing it. Like, we've got a bit of a weed problem, but I've observed that there's only weeds in places where there's no native trees and things like that. And I'm like, oh, there's a story here, and I'm just figuring it all out. And yeah, the more time I spend there just walking around, and now we have this awesome ranger which is taking us off the beaten track, and I'm finding things. I'm like, I just am nerding out. Like, I'm loving it.
Yeah, it's a huge nerd out
Yeah.
world, the plant and mushroom world.
It is. And before we wrap up, maybe you can just let everyone know where to find you if they want more information.
Yeah. Well, so a few ways. I have a website. It's theforagersplate.com. I'm also on Instagram at theforagersplate and Facebook. And we have the Forage and Grow New South Wales group, which is on Facebook. Again, I know it's totally naff, but super cool for the actual platform of the group. And it's a really great way to start the learning journey, because you can just be observing as well without having to, still in your own space, and just like seeing what other people are finding currently as well. So it helps you to know what's seasonally available in your area as well. So it's a super cool way to do it. But I always have events coming up as well. I normally do a wild food event once a month, where we do a foraging component, and we also eat lots of yummy wild foods that I make for everyone together. At the moment, we're doing mushroom walks. So everyone coming up at the last weekend of May. That's we're going in Currumbin for that one, and possibly some in June as well. Hopefully that the mushroom season doesn't slow down too much when it gets too cold. But yeah, there's always events happening, and we always promote other people's events that run in the Northern Rivers. There's also Belly of the World Mushrooms. Martin Martini runs walks in the Northern Rivers and around Australia, and he's been one of my mushroom mentors as well. But yeah, there's a few other people in the group too that run things. So there's always something coming up for people to learn and get involved in.
Amazing. I'll be there.
Yay.
Thank you again, Chanterelle.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Road to Wisdom podcast. To join the journey, you can follow us on Instagram at theroadtowisdom.podcast and at www.theroadtowisdompodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. We look forward to seeing you next week with more juicy content.